Lingchi. There's a reason this punishment terrified entire dynasties for over 1,000 years. And it wasn't just the pain. Lingchi, translated as slow slicing, was China's ultimate weapon against traitors and murderers from 900 CE until 1905. Here's what made it so horrifying. You were tied to a wooden pole in a packed public square while an executioner used a razor-sharp knife to methodically remove pieces of your body. But here's the twisted part. It wasn't random. The process followed a strict sequence. First your ears, nose, fingers, and toes, then larger chunks from your thighs and shoulders. The law prescribed exactly how many cuts you'd endure based on your crime, anywhere from 100 to 3,000 slices. If you were wealthy, you could bribe the executioner for a merciful throat cut. But if the executioner killed you too quickly, he would face punishment himself. The last victim, Fu Zhu Li, died this way in 1905 for murdering his employer. The physical torture was only half of it. Traditional Chinese beliefs said a mutilated body couldn't find peace in the afterlife. This wasn't just execution, it was spiritual annihilation. What if I told you the worst execution in history might never have actually happened? Yet it's so disturbing, historians still debate it today. This is Scaphism, the boats, and even reading about it is nightmare fuel. Here's how the ancient Persians allegedly did it. They'd trap you between two small boats with only your head, hands, and feet sticking out. Then they'd force-feed you milk and honey while smearing it all over your exposed skin. Sounds strange, right? Wait for it. Left floating in stagnant water under the scorching sun, your body became a breeding ground. Flies, wasps, and insects swarmed you. The milk and honey fermenting in your gut caused violent diarrhea. Your own waste accumulated around you in the boat, attracting more vermin and maggots. You couldn't move, couldn't escape, couldn't even swat away the insects devouring you. According to Plutarch, a victim named Mithridates survived 17 days like this, 17 days of slowly decomposing while still alive. Here's the question. Was this real or Greek propaganda to make Persians look barbaric? We may never know, but the fact that someone imagined it tells you everything about human cruelty. England didn't just execute traitors, they made an art form out of it. Drawing and quartering became law in 1352, and what happened next redefined brutality. This wasn't one punishment. It was 4 separate tortures designed to destroy you completely. First, you were drawn, tied to a wooden sled and dragged through the streets behind a horse while crowds pelted you with garbage. That was just the beginning. At the gallows, they hanged you by the neck, but here's the crucial detail. They cut you down before you died. While you were still conscious and gasping for air, they castrated you and sliced open your abdomen. Then they pulled out your intestines and burned them in front of your eyes. Only then would they behead you and carve your body into 4 pieces, sometimes by tying each limb to a different horse. William Wallace, the Scottish hero from Braveheart, actually endured this in 1305. His head went on London Bridge. His body parts were sent to 4 different cities as warnings. Guy Fawkes was sentenced to the same fate in 1606, though he broke his neck jumping from the gallows to avoid the worst of it. The punishment wasn't abolished until 1870, over 500 years of legally sanctioned horror. Most execution methods killed you quickly. This one was designed to keep you alive as long as possible while destroying every bone in your body. The breaking wheel, also called the Catherine wheel, was medieval Europe's masterpiece of prolonged agony. They'd strap you to a large wagon wheel with your limbs spread along the spokes. Then an executioner with a heavy iron hammer would systematically shatter every bone, starting with your shins and working upward. But here's where it gets calculated. Sharp wooden beams were placed under your joints to ensure complete destruction. The number of blows was prescribed by law. Sometimes they'd even specify which spoke of the wheel to use. In some regions, after breaking every bone, they'd weave your shattered body through the wheel's spokes and hoist you on a pole for public display. And you'd still be alive. Historical records document a 14th-century murderer who survived 3 days like this. German serial killer Christmann Gnippertange lasted 9 agonizing days in 1581, kept conscious with alcohol so the suffering would continue. This wasn't execution. This was theater, and you were the performance until your last breath. The last known breaking wheel execution happened in Prussia in 1841. Imagine being locked inside a bronze oven shaped like a bull while fire roasts you alive. Now imagine something even worse. Your screams of agony engineered to sound like a bull's bellowing for entertainment. That's the Brazen Bull, allegedly invented around 560 BCE by Pericles of Athens for Phalaris, the tyrant of Sicily. The condemned was locked inside this hollow bronze statue through a door in its side. Fire was lit underneath. As the metal heated to extreme temperatures, you'd essentially be roasted alive, unable to escape as the bronze glowed red hot. But Paralas added a sadistic touch, an acoustic system of tubes inside the bull's head that transformed human screams into animal sounds. Spectators didn't hear your agony. They heard entertainment. Here's the twist. Phalaris was so disgusted by the invention that he made Paralyas the first victim, locking him inside to test his own creation. Centuries later, Emperor Hadrian used the Brazen Bull to execute Saint Eustace and his family for refusing to worship Roman gods. Modern historians debate how widely this was actually used versus being legendary exaggeration. But whether real or myth, the Brazen Bull shows how far human imagination goes when designing suffering. Your skin contains more nerve endings than any other part of your body. Now imagine all of it being systematically removed while you're still conscious. Flaying, skinning alive, was the Assyrian Empire's signature terror tactic from the 14th century BCE until 610 BCE. After conquering cities, Assyrian kings would flay enemy nobility in public, then display the skins as trophies and warnings to others. The procedure started with strategic cuts, then executioners would peel the skin away from the underlying tissue, often beginning with the face or limbs. Death came from shock, blood loss, hypothermia, and infection, but it could take hours or days depending on how much skin was removed. In medieval Europe, flaying was so rare there's only one fully verified case. Venetian commander Marcantonio Bragadin in 1571. Yet after negotiating an honorable surrender at Cyprus, the Ottomans violated the terms. Bragadin was tortured for 2 weeks before being publicly flayed alive in August 1571. But here's the disturbing epilogue. His skin was stuffed with straw, mounted on a cow, and paraded through the streets before being sent as a trophy to the Sultan in Constantinople. Years later, the Venetians recovered it and enshrined it as a holy relic. It's still preserved today, a permanent reminder of one man's unimaginable suffering. The Romans didn't invent crucifixion, but they perfected it as psychological warfare. This wasn't just execution, it was a slow-motion spectacle designed to break the spirits of anyone watching. Here's what actually happened. First, you'd be forced to carry your own crossbeam through the streets while being whipped and mocked by crowds. At the execution site, you'd be stripped naked and nailed to the cross, but not through your palms like you've seen in movies. That wouldn't support your weight. The nails went through your wrists and feet. When the cross was raised and dropped into a hole, the shock to your body was immediate. But death? That took hours, sometimes days. Here's the mechanism most people don't know. Crucifixion kills you by asphyxiation. Your body weight pulls down. I'm making it impossible to breathe unless you push up on your pierced feet. Eventually, exhaustion wins. You can't push up anymore. You suffocate. To speed things up, executioners would break your legs, removing your ability to lift yourself. The most famous victim was Jesus around 30 CE, but the Romans crucified thousands. After the Spartacus rebellion in 71 BCE, they crucified 6,000 slaves along the Appian Way, a 120-mile road lined with dying men. That's not punishment. That's a message no one could miss. Boiling alive. In 1531, England made poisoning special. Not the crime, the punishment. If you killed someone with poison, you'd be boiled alive in public. The first victim was a cook named Richard Roos, accused of poisoning the Bishop of Rochester's household and killing 2 people. They brought a massive cauldron to Smithfield, filled it with water, and brought it to a rolling boil. Then they threw him in. But here's what made this legally unique. The law specifically said poisoners should be boiled to death in water or in lye. Lye being a corrosive chemical that would dissolve your skin while boiling you. The logic? Poisoners killed in secret, so they deserved the most public, painful death imaginable as a deterrent. Margaret Davy, convicted of poisoning her employer in 1542, became one of the few women executed this way. Here is the surprising part. England abolished this after only 16 years in 1547. Even Tudor England, known for brutality, decided it was too much. But boiling didn't die everywhere. In parts of Asia, Mongolia, Japan, criminals were lowered into boiling oil or water, sometimes gradually with the temperature slowly increased to maximize suffering. In medieval Russia, counterfeiters faced the same fate. The screams alone were said to be unforgettable. Pressed to death. What if refusing to speak could kill you? In medieval England, silence wasn't just contempt of court. It was a death sentence with a legal loophole. Peine forte et dure, or pressing to death, was reserved for defendants who wouldn't plead guilty or not guilty. No plea meant no trial, so the law found a solution: torture you until you talked or died. They'd strip you naked, lay you on the ground, place a wooden board on your chest, then add heavy stones one by one. The weight would slowly crush your chest cavity, making each breath harder until breathing became impossible. Your ribs would fracture, your organs would compress and rupture. But here's the twisted logic. Some defendants chose this deliberately. Under English law, if you refused to plead, your property couldn't be confiscated. It would pass to your heirs. But if you were convicted, your family got nothing. So some people chose to be crushed to death to save their children's inheritance. The most famous case was Giles Corey during the Salem witch trials in 1692. As the stones piled on, legend says his final words were, "More weight." He died protecting his family's future. The practice was abolished in 1772 in England, though you could legally stand mute until 1827. That's 55 years where silence was still an option, just not a fatal one. Impalement. One name made this punishment infamous: Vlad the Impaler. And once you hear what he did, you'll understand why the legend of Dracula came from Wallachia in the 15th century. Impalement meant forcing a sharpened wooden stake through your body, usually entering through the rectum or vagina and exiting through your mouth or chest. But here's the skill that made it truly horrific. The stake couldn't be too sharp. It had to be rounded and oiled. Why? Because a sharp stake would kill you too quickly. An expert executioner could thread the stake past vital organs, keeping you alive for hours or even days while gravity slowly pulled your body weight down onto it. Vlad III impaled tens of thousands of people during his reign from 1456 to 1462. He'd arrange them in forests at varying heights. Nobles and clergy got the highest stakes as a sign of status. When Ottoman armies invaded, they'd find entire landscapes of impaled victims, some still alive. The psychological impact was devastating. Soldiers would flee rather than risk capture. The Ottoman Empire adopted the practice themselves, using it extensively against rebels. In some Asian cultures, impalement was done horizontally through the abdomen. This wasn't just execution, it was terror as a weapon. The sight, the smell, the screams of the dying created fear that lasted generations. Crushing by elephant. For 4,000 years, South Asia had executioners that weighed several tons and could be trained to kill slowly or quickly on command. War elephants weren't just weapons, they were living instruments of royal justice. Condemned criminals would face death by elephant in elaborate public ceremonies that demonstrated both the ruler's power and their capacity for mercy or cruelty. Here's what made this unique. The elephants were trained to execute in specific ways. They could step on your limbs one by one, systematically breaking bones before crushing your chest or head. Or they could use their trunk to literally tear you apart, limb from limb. Some executioner elephants were fitted with bladed tusks or iron shoes to increase the damage, but here's the strangest part. This method allowed for theatrical pardons. A ruler could stop the execution at the last second, and the elephant would obey. In 16th century India, military chief Jujar Khan Bakshi was thrown beneath the war elephant Manmil and trampled to death for his military failures. Emperor Akbar, who ruled from 1556 to 1605, regularly used elephants for executions. European colonizers who witnessed these events noted something disturbing. The elephants seemed to understand their role. Some showed reluctance, others appeared to show enthusiasm. The practice continued in some regions until the 19th century before finally ending. The rack. The Tower of London held many secrets, but its most famous torture device didn't kill, it made you beg for death. The rack was a rectangular wooden frame with rollers at each end. Your wrists were chained to one roller, your ankles to the other. Then the torturer would turn a handle, slowly rotating the rollers in opposite directions. At first, you'd feel your joints stretching, pain would shoot through your shoulders and hips. Then came the dislocations. One by one, your joints would pop out of their sockets. But if they kept turning, your ligaments would tear and your limbs would separate from your body entirely. The psychological torture was worse than you'd think. You could see everything happening. You could anticipate each turn of the wheel. You knew exactly what was coming and couldn't stop it. Guy Fawkes, the gunpowder plot conspirator, was racked before his execution in 1606. His signature on his confession looked nothing like his earlier handwriting. His hands were destroyed. The rack had a nickname in the Tower of London, the Duke of Exeter's daughter, named after the Duke who introduced it to England in 1447. The Spanish Inquisition loved it for extracting heresy confessions. But here's the problem. Tortured people will say anything to make it stop. By the 17th century, even torturers realized the rack produced unreliable confessions. It was slowly abandoned, not out of mercy, but because it didn't even work. Burning at the stake. Medieval Europe found the perfect execution for heretics, witches, and traitors, one that was biblically justified, publicly spectacular, and left no body to bury. Burning at the stake served every purpose rulers needed: religious righteousness, crowd entertainment, and complete destruction of the condemned. You'd be tied to a wooden post on top of a pyre made of dry wood, kindling, and straw. When lit, what happened next depended entirely on luck. If smoke filled your lungs first, you'd die from asphyxiation before the flames reached you, a mercy. But if the wind blew the smoke away or the fire burned slowly, you'd experience the full horror of being burned alive for up to 15 minutes. The smell of burning flesh, the sound of your own skin crackling, the pain beyond description. Some executioners showed mercy by strangling victims first or placing gunpowder bags around their necks for a quicker death. Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in 1431 at just 19 years old, convicted of heresy. During the witch trial hysteria of the 16th and 17th centuries, tens of thousands, mostly women, burned across Europe. The Spanish Inquisition burned thousands of heretics. Protestant reformers burned Catholics. Catholic rulers burned Protestants. It didn't matter which side you were on, fire consumed them all. The practice finally ended in the late 18th century, but the psychological scars lasted much longer. Sawing in half. Some punishments were designed to be quick. This one was engineered to keep you conscious as long as possible while being cut in two. Sawing in half was practiced in ancient Rome, medieval Europe, Persia, and parts of Asia. The procedure was simple but horrifying. You'd be suspended upside down between two posts with your legs spread and secured. Two executioners would then use a large, two-handled saw to cut vertically through your body, starting from the groin moving toward the head. Here's the sick genius. Hanging you upside down ensured maximum blood flow to your brain. You'd stay conscious much longer than if you were right side up. Most victims remained alive and aware until the saw reached their abdomen or chest, feeling every single back-and-forth motion of the blade. In some Asian variations, victims were placed upright and sawed horizontally through the waist, which was faster but no less brutal. The Spanish Inquisition allegedly used sawing for severe cases of blasphemy or heresy, though documented cases are sparse compared to other methods. In ancient Persia, sawing was sometimes combined with other tortures in elaborate execution rituals. The psychological horror, watching the saw approach, knowing exactly what's about to happen, being unable to escape or even pass out, made this one of the most feared punishments. By the 18th century, it had disappeared as more humane executions were adopted, but the memory of it never faded. Rat torture. What's the worst thing you can imagine? Now multiply it by using living creatures and the victim's own body against them. Rat torture exploited one simple fact. Rats will do anything to survive, and when trapped in a heated container on someone's stomach, there's only one way out. A cage or metal pot containing rats would be placed on your abdomen, bottomless, with the opening pressed directly against your skin. The other side would then be heated with hot coals or open flame. As the temperature rose inside, the rats would panic. They'd become increasingly frenzied, desperate to escape the unbearable heat, and with nowhere else to go, they'd do the only thing they could: claw and chew through your flesh. You'd be fully conscious, completely helpless, unable to stop them as they literally ate their way into your body, burrowing through skin and muscle to escape. The rats weren't trying to torture you. They were trying to survive, but the result was the same. Historical documentation of rat torture is debated. Though it appears in various periods across medieval Europe and Asia, the method gained dark fame in the 20th century with allegations of its use in modern warfare and political torture. George Orwell made it infamous in 1984 as the ultimate personalized torture. The thing you fear most turned against you. Whether widespread or rare, rat torture represents something uniquely disturbing, transforming another creature's survival instinct into a weapon of unimaginable cruelty. The anticipation alone was psychological devastation.